Alright, so we are on the draw. This hand is a bit slow, but we do have to keep it. The mana base in this deck isn't the greatest. A lot of the lands do come into play tapped. The swamp is a pretty good draw for us, although it is another land, so we don't want to get too flooded. But we'll see what we're up against here. Probably some sort of Bant deck would be my first inclination, although now we see a swamp, so we're definitely not up against Bant. Okay. Interesting. So we drew Transgress the Mind. So we could play the Transgress. We could also just play Jace. Couple good options here for us. Gonna go ahead and go for the Jace here. Our opponent could potentially have Ultimate Price at the ready, or another removal spell for it, but I think we want to get it into play. And it looks like our opponent is playing an Esper deck of their own. So let's try a Transgress and see what happens. Alright, so it looks like we're playing a bit of a mirror match here. Control mirrors are always pretty interesting. We see Narset as well as double Dark Petition, so I'm going to take, and the Salamgar's command, so we're going to take the Narset because that's the card our opponent can cast immediately next turn. And now we know that our removal is not as important in this matchup. Cards like Grasp of Darkness, Descend Upon the Sinful. So we'll keep that in mind moving forward. And we can just go ahead and pitch the Grasp of Darkness here. Although it looks like we're getting a little bit flooded, so we may want to start pitching lands. We're actually getting Jace flooded as well, which isn't really what we want to have happen. We're still a couple cards in the graveyard short of being able to flip our Jace. And it looks like our opponent is not going to cast Dark Petition here. But we know that our opponent does have Salamgar's command in hand. So I think we just play our land and pass the turn here. We don't really need to force the issue, and we don't want to run anything into the Salamgar's command. So we'll attempt to loot, and have a couple options in terms of what we want to discard here. Let's go with a Jace. We've already got another one as backup here. And I think this is the spot where we actually want to cast our Dark Petition. And if our opponent tries to get rid of our Jace, we can always flip it in response. So basically, if our opponent counters this Dark Petition and then tries to kill our Jace, we can flip it. So it looks like the petition is going to resolve. Interesting. So I think we actually want to get Transgress the Mind here, and we can try to work our way and pick apart our opponent's hand a little bit, because we know that our opponent's got some good stuff in hand. So now we're going for Transgress the Mind. We know about double Dark Petition, but it's the Salumgar's command that our opponent really has to be thinking about right now, and how they want to navigate using that card. What we can actually do this turn potentially is flash back the Transgress the Mind with our Jace Vryn's Prodigy. The Descend upon the Sinful is not that good in this matchup, but it is a way of dealing with an Emrakul once it hits the battlefield. So it looks like our opponent's thinking about whether or not to use the Slumgar's command, and it looks like a counter and then -3/-3 our Jace. So in response to that, we are going to loot, and this is going to save our Jace, essentially. Although our Transgress is still going to get countered. And now we have a bit of a choice. And we've got 1 mana in our mana pool, but I think we actually want to flash back the Transgress the Mind in our graveyard. And this does mean that our Jace may die on the following turn, but we're at least, if our opponent attacks our Jace, then they're not going to be doing much on their turn. So we see double Dark Petition. We can take one of them, and we're just going to pass the turn here. So we'll see if our opponent does fire up the Shambling Vents, or if they would rather cast the Dark Petition. The Transgress the Mind is going to get the Descend upon the Sinful out of our hand. So this is going to come down to top decking. We know our opponent has a Languish and a Dark Petition in hand. Ruinous Path isn't a bad card to have here. We don't really want to cast this Jace since we know about the Languish our opponent has. It's also not really going to do that much just sitting in our hand, though. So we'll cast it. So if our opponent does get a Planeswalker, we can Ruinous Path it. Yep, so there's the Languish, as expected. We're just trading resources right now. And it looks like our opponent has a follow-up Jace. We don't need to immediately get rid of it. We can take a draw step. So since we drew Anguished Unmaking, I actually don't mind using this Ruinous Path to get rid of the Jace. It's definitely not the conventional play, but we would be able to awaken one of our lands, which is pretty nice. Let's try it. It may... well, yeah, let's try it. So we've got Anguished Unmaking, which can answer any permanent that our opponent might come up with here. But we'll see if our opponent does fire off the Dark Petition here or decides to sit on it for a little while longer. I would guess our opponent would have the option here to Dark Petition for Nixilis, but might be waiting to try to work their way towards Emrakul. And this looks like almost a full-on mirror match here. We're definitely looking to draw a Planeswalker, Oath of Jace would be a good draw. And here's the Dark Petition, so we'll see if our opponent does get something like an Ob Nixilis. Now, if our opponent does do that, we have the Anguished Unmaking, which can answer it. It does mean we'll lose our Prairie Stream in the process, but that's a sacrifice I think we're willing to make. So there is the Ob Nixilis. That's going to most likely tick down. Yep, so there goes the Prairie Stream. And it looks like basically we're in a top deck war. So that's where we're at right now. Liliana the Last Hope. That's not a bad one here. We're going to get rid of the Ob Nixilis, and we're going to wait. We're going to sit on the Lily for one more turn, because we don't want it to get attacked by the Shambling Vent. And now we can play Lily with Grasp of Darkness up. So we can play Lily, tick it down, and get back one of our Jaces. And now we're going to pass back the turn. Now this Languish isn't really doing a whole lot for us. But this isn't the matchup for Languish. And I like to hold on to cards like this in hand, because in case we draw an Oath, and it looks like our opponent does have a removal spell, but in case we draw an Oath, we can discard the cards we don't want, like Languish. And our opponent has a second Shambling Vents, which is pretty bad for us, actually. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of this one with our Grasp. Alright, so we drew another blank, basically, in Evolving Wilds. So I think it's time to go ahead and cash our Liliana in. And we can get back Jace. We're not lucky enough to mill Emrakul, it looks like. So we're going to get Jace back. And hopefully our opponent doesn't immediately top deck removal here. And they did. Okay, so top deck Languish. That's going to wipe out our Jace. If our opponent hadn't drawn that Languish, we would have been in great shape. Because we would have been able to flip our Jace, flash back our Dark Petition that's in the graveyard. But that did not happen. So we're forced to draw off the top again. So it's basically who draws a gas spell first. And our opponent's tapping mana, so that's probably bad news. And yep, our opponent top decked Emrakul, so worst case scenario for us. We're basically now hoping to rip something off the top of our deck that can deal with this Emrakul. Our opponent is going to sacrifice the Evolving Wilds, get nothing. I would expect the Languish to get cast, the Shambling Vent to run into... I would expect what our opponent should do here. And we're basically hoping to draw Dark Petition, Dragon Lord Slumgar, or Ob Nixilis. But basically... what our opponent should do here is activate our Shambling Vent and then Languish it away, leaving us with basically nothing. And so we'll see if that is what they elect to do or not. I don't think we've done anything wrong this game. It's been purely top decks, and we see the power of a top decked Emrakul here. Maybe we'll be able to answer it. Who knows? So yeah, it looks like our opponent sees the line. And now it's going to be our turn again. And we really need an immediate answer here. We do have some. that will do it. And bang! Off the top, Dragon Lord Slumgar. So we can actually take our opponent's Emrakul here. And that's pretty absurd. But now if our opponent draws a removal spell, that's really bad for us. What a back and forth game this is. That was pretty insane. Did our opponent really just peel something off the top? Oh my god. There's Sorin. Wow. That's just... that's brutal. So now our opponent's going to have a Sorin, an Emrakul, and our Dragonlord Slumgar is gone. Wow. Well, we can try to redraw here. Not looking great, but we're gonna cast this Oath of Jace here. Yep, not what we wanted at all. Really looking for something like an Ob Nixilis to at least be able to get this Emrakul off the table. We see an Emrakul of our own sitting on top of our deck. But we might actually just die this turn. Our opponent's going to be able to tick up the Sorin, activate the Channeling Vent, so we may just be dead. Although our opponent hit Prairie Stream, so we may be able to actually cast the Emrakul. We'll see. Alright, so our opponent is going to activate Channeling Vent. And it looks like both the Shambling Vent and the Emrakul are coming straight at us, so that's going to mean that our life total drops all the way down to 2. And we're going to get to scry here once. And we're going to put our Emrakul on top. Hopefully it's going to be good enough to get us out of this spot. So we've got 5 card types in our graveyard. That means that Emrakul costs 8. Luckily, the amount of lands we have in play is 8. So, we are going to cast Emrakul and take our opponent's turn. And it looks like we just drew a copy of Sorin. So, this is pretty interesting here. The question is, do we want our opponent's Emrakul in play or not? We're definitely going to play this Sorin. We might as well put the land down as well. So we're going to play the Sorin. And we're going to have to choose which one of these Sorins we want to keep. Right now it's 2 Emrakuls squaring off against each other. And I think we probably want to keep our Emrakul in play, because it's our easiest route to winning the game. So we'll keep the smaller Sorin here. So we're going to get rid of the Sorin completely. And now we can activate the Shambling Vent. And we're gonna be able to go ahead and block here with our Emrakul. So our opponent is going to get a draw here. We'll see if our opponent draws an out or not. If not, then our opponent may elect to attack in with Emrakul. We'll see. Alright, it looks like the attack is coming in, so the Emrakuls are going to trade off here. And we're going to be trying to actually ultimate the Narset, but alright, our opponent has peeled Descend Upon the Sinful, so that's going to give them a 4/4 Angel. So now we're going to be scrying to try to find an answer, and we did. We found Ultimate Price. So I don't even think we need to cast the Oath just yet. We're moving towards going ultimate with our Narset, and our opponent's not going to be able to do much once that ultimate has happened. Alright, here's a Jace Vryn's Prodigy. We are going to have to figure out how we're going to close out the game. So we're going to ultimate Narset. We can grasp away this Jace and we can start getting in, and our opponent basically now is left completely helpless. So we're going to go ahead and start doing the work to close out the game. We have double Shambling Vent now online. And this deck doesn't play that many win conditions, so this really is a very peculiar game. Alright, our opponent's found another Jace Vryn's Prodigy, it looks like. But what we can do here now is cast the Dark Petition we just drew. We have 2 copies of Sorin left in the deck, so we're going to get a Sorin. And we can play Sorin now. We might as well just get rid of this Jace for good measure. And we just drew another Sorin off of the Sorin activation, so that's going to put our opponent at a lower life total, which is nice. Now, interestingly enough, we would be the ones to deck out if it came to that, but it's not going to. There's the Ob Nixilis, and we're going to be able to close this game out. It's been a really interesting game. And that's going to do it, so what a game 1 that was. I was pretty sure we were dead. A series of top decks later, our opponent top decked on us, then we top decked on our opponent. Crazy, crazy stuff there. And this is I mean, this is a true control mirror. We really have to think about how we can navigate this mirror match. So we want to be taking out the cards like Languish. We saw Languish not really do that much. Ultimate Price is also not that important. We're definitely going to board in our discard spells. We can board in our Coax from the Blind Eternity to get our Emrakul from our deck. So I like that. And I think we probably want to shave on some grasps. So Orbs of Warding is a pretty powerful card. And I think we want to bring it in this matchup. It stops your turn getting taken from with Emrakul, so that's pretty relevant. We also want the Summary Dismissal as a counterspell effect. And we probably want the Ojutai's Command and the Liliana as well. Although we would need to cut one card with this configuration, so I think that's fine. We can just cut another Grasp. And that game took a while, so I am going to have to play a bit faster here due to time constraints on Magic Online. Control mirrors can be a bit of a grind, so bear with me. We have turn 2 Jace here, so hopefully that sticks in play and we can get some activations out of it. Looks like our opponent might also have a Jace. Yep, okay. Jace on Jace. And we have Duress, so we can use that Duress and try to see exactly what's going on, what our opponent's up to. Hopefully our Jace stays in play, but we also have another copy if our opponent does have a removal spell for it. And we boarded out Grasp, so we don't have as many ways of killing Jace at this stage, but we do have some bigger spells that can get rid of it. We see Slumgar's Command. Once Jace flips, we can then get rid of it if it's a Planeswalker, stuff like that. Although, here's a Transgress. So the Transgress the Mind is going to potentially take the Coax from the Blind Eternity, Summary Dismissal, or Slumgar's Command. And it may be that we should have actually boarded in our Infinite Obliteration in this matchup. That may have been a bit of an oversight. Yeah, so our opponent's taking Slumgar's Command. We actually drew the Emrakul, so we can discard our Coax from the Blind Eternity and potentially flash it back later depending on what happens. And go ahead and Duress. And it looks like our opponent also has a very similar hand to ours. Wow. So with Sorin in hand and a Coax, we can take the Sorin here. Pretty weird set of circumstances these games have been so far. So the Summary Dismissal in our hand, our opponent does know about. It's also a great answer to Emrakul. So our opponent is gonna Coax from the Blind Eternity, and I would suspect... Okay, so yep, it is another copy of Emrakul that's entered our opponent's hand now. Now we're going to get the loot. And our opponent's Jace has flipped before ours, so that's somewhat bad for us. We do have the Shambling Vent, which we can use to pressure this Jace. And we drew Anguished Unmaking, so we're actually probably going to want to Anguished Unmaking away our opponent's Jace. We can discard our excess Jace and now get rid of our opponent's Jace. So now we're winning the Jace battle, essentially. Alright, there's the Ruinous Pass, so now we're back to even. We know that our opponent has 2 copies of Emrakul in hand, and there is an Oath of Jace. So we can cast Oath of Jace here. And we drew into some more gas, so we're going to go ahead and discard the lands and keep the spells. We've got Ojutai's Command, which can bring back our Jace, draw us a card. It can also counter Emrakul if we feel like we need to go in that direction. Here's a Dark Petition, which is a card we definitely could cast here. I don't mind actually casting the Dark Petition. So let's do that. And we'll see if our opponent wants to counter it or do something like that. So yep, it's going to be a counter spell on our Dark Petition, which is perfectly fine. We don't mind that at all. So our opponent's looking to get to Emrakul, but is still a little bit far away. We're not going to fire off this Duress. We know that our opponent doesn't have targets for it in their hand. So we're just going to pass the turn here. Here's a Transgress the Mind. That's going to be pretty good, actually. So the question is, do we respond to this Transgress? Do we cast a Summary Dismissal? Do we let it resolve? It's definitely a close call. I think what we do is we're just going to Ojutai's Command this turn. So let's do that. And so now our opponent's got some options. The option between Summary Dismissal and Emrakul. We'll see which one our opponent elects to go for. Now, if our opponent does go for Emrakul, what we can do is we can flip our Jace, and then we can flash back the Coax from the Blind Eternity to get our other copy of Emrakul. So our opponent definitely has a bit of a decision there, but it makes sense to go ahead and take the Summary Dismissal, which is what happened. And, okay, so we're going to go ahead and loot here. Got a bunch of lands all of a sudden, so the question is what we want to do this turn. With our Jace, it may be that we want to go ahead and just tick it up. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and discard the Choked Estuary. And I like going ahead and ticking the Jace up for one turn here. We don't need to flash anything back just yet. Now we are gambling a little bit. We don't want our opponent to draw a removal spell for Jace, but it looks like it's just another land off the top. And our opponent does not yet have white mana for Shambling Vent activation. So So we're going to keep this Dark Petition on top of our deck. That's definitely a good one to have access to. And I think what we want to do now is actually Dark Petition to get Transgress the Mind so we can take away both of our opponent's Emrakuls. We could also get Orbs of Warding, but I think we'd rather just go ahead and do this. So now both of our opponent's Emrakuls are completely gone, and things are looking pretty good. So our opponent top-decked a Oath of Jace, but since our opponent is hellbent, that's going to mean that they're only going to be able to keep one spell, and 2 lands hit the graveyard here. We do have Duress in hand, so we can potentially use that here to see exactly what our opponent's working with. Got 4 card types in the yard, so we're still a little bit away from casting Emrakul. So there's the Ruinous Path, so we're kind of back to square one, but our opponent's Emrakuls are out of their deck. Here's an Orbs of Warding. So I like just casting this right now. That's going to also protect us from discard. And it looks like our opponent is just past the turn here. So we drew Oath of Jace, which we can cast. So let's do it. We drew some good stuff here. Wow, we drew some really good stuff. The Dragon Lord Slumgar could be good. I think we just discard the Duress. And we could discard the Sorin. That way we have another card type in our graveyard. Which would basically mean we could cast Emrakul. Alright, let's go for it. Let's discard the Sorin. Play the Jace Vryn's Prodigy. And pass. So now we're up to 6 card types, and we can cast Emrakul on our next turn. Alright, our opponent did have Grasp of Darkness. That's not great, but we're going to be able to get this Emrakul into play. So we'll be able to see exactly what our opponent's got in hand. The draw is Jace, so what we're definitely going to want to do here is cast the Jace. And then we can just go ahead and cast the Grasp of Darkness targeting the Jace. Or what we can do... Yeah, I think this is better. So we're going to go ahead and cast the Grasp of Darkness targeting Jace. And now our opponent's going to get their next turn. But we're looking pretty good here. This Emrakul could definitely take us the distance. Hopefully our opponent doesn't draw some type of removal spell, but we're just gonna go ahead and fire up our Shambling Vents and speed up this clock significantly. So our opponent's gonna go all the way down to 3. This could very easily be it. We'll see if our opponent drew something. So that's actually gonna be the